The new maid's son was called the school weirdo. No one expected him to break into the Millionaire's office, but when he saw the million-dollar projects, something in him awakened, and a childish correction revealed a talent that would change everything. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. In the small house with peeling walls in the suburbs of the capital, Marco, a 12-year-old boy, woke up before sunrise. His brown eyes shone with anticipation as he prepared for another day with his mother, Diana, at the Muller mansion. It was no ordinary day. It was the first time he would accompany his mother to work since she had gotten the job as a cleaner at the imposing residence. As he packed his battered backpack, Marco pulled out his most precious treasures, a sketchbook with yellowed pages, worn-colored pencils, and an old botanical encyclopedia he had found in a second-hand bookstore. To other boys his age, these objects would have been worthless junk, but to Marco, they were essential tools for connecting with the natural world. "Marco, are you ready?" Diana called from the kitchen, her soft voice carrying a mix of concern and hope. She knew her son was different. While the other kids in the neighborhood played ball in the street or gathered around to play video games, Marco spent hours in the small garden he cultivated in his backyard, talking to the plants as if they were his confidants. "Yes, I am, Mom," he replied, quickly packing up his belongings. As he walked down the hallway, he stopped briefly in front of the portrait of his father, who had passed away when Marco was only 3 years old. Diana never talked much about him, but the boy sometimes wondered if his affinity for plants had something to do with this man he had barely known. The journey to the Muller mansion was made in silence on the crowded bus. Marco looked out the window at the few green areas that remained among the city's grey buildings. His fingers itched to draw the patterns he saw in the leaves of the trees, in the vines that ventured over the walls, in the stubborn flowers that sprouted from the cracks in the asphalt. When they arrived at the mansion's gates, Marco's mouth fell open. The front garden was immense, but something in his heart sank when he noticed the inconsistencies in the arrangement of the plants. There were species that clearly suffered from being exposed to too much sun, while others withered from too much shade. It was as if he could hear the silent lament of that poorly planned ecosystem. "Remember what we agreed on," Diana whispered, as they crossed the garden. "You are to stay in the staff quarters. You are not to wander around the house, especially Mr. Muller's office. It is very important that you follow these rules, son." Marco nodded, but his eyes were already wandering around the flower beds, identifying problems and imagining solutions. As his mother headed off to begin her tasks, he was led by Donna Zana, the housekeeper, to a small room in the servants' annex. The space was simple, with a table, a few chairs, and a window that looked out onto the back of the property. "Stay here, boy," Miss Zana instructed firmly but not unkindly. "There's water in the dispenser and some cookies in the pantry if you get hungry. Your mother will come see you at lunchtime." Alone in the room, Marco opened his notebook and began to draw what he saw through the window. His nimble hands traced lines that represented not only the shape of the plants, but also what he felt emanating from them. There was something else in that garden, something that whispered secrets through the leaves and the wind. The hours dragged by and curiosity grew in his chest. Through the window, he could see a part of the main house that seemed especially intriguing. A room with large glass windows, where he could glimpse shelves full of books and papers spread out on an imposing table. His heart beat faster every time he looked in that direction. During lunch, his mother appeared briefly, bringing a sandwich and juice. "Is everything okay, son? Behaving yourself?" "Yes, Mother," Marco replied, but his eyes remained fixed on that mysterious window. Diana followed his gaze and frowned. "That's Mr. Muller's office," she explained, lowering her voice. "It's strictly off-limits to employees. I don't even go in there to clean. Only Miss Zana is allowed to do that." Marco nodded, but something inside him had already awakened. That room called to him, as if it held secrets that only he could understand. And as the afternoon wore on, the call became more and more irresistible. The clock struck 3 in the afternoon when Marco noticed an unusual movement in the house. Donna Zana hurried across the hall, mumbling something about an urgent meeting that required the presence of all the staff upstairs. The boy's heart raced. This was his chance. With silent steps, Marco left the staff room. His feet guided him as if they knew the way, as if the plants in the garden themselves whispered directions through the windows. The main corridor was deserted, and the forbidden office rose before him, imposing and mysterious. The doorknob turned without resistance. Stepping inside, Marco was enveloped in a space that seemed to have come straight out of his wildest dreams. The office was a sanctuary of knowledge, walls lined with ancient books, meticulously framed botanical maps, and a massive oak desk covered in landscape plans. His eyes scanned the shelves, recognizing rare titles on botany that he only knew, from references in his old encyclopedia. But it was the projects spread out on the table that truly captured his attention. They were floor plans of gardens, parks, and green areas from all over the city. With trembling hands, Marco began to examine the documents. His heart beat faster and faster as he identified serious errors in the plans. Incompatible species side by side, poorly positioned irrigation systems, areas of shade and sun completely ignored. It was as if he could hear the silent cry of nature through those papers. Without a second thought, Marco pulled his notebook from his backpack and began to make notes. His fingers flew over the paper, correcting angles, suggesting more suitable species, redesigning drainage systems. In his mind, he could clearly see what each garden should look like, not as a human imposition on nature, but as a harmonious dance between the planned and the natural. Time seemed to stand still as he worked. His corrections were not based solely on technical knowledge. There was something deeper, an intuitive understanding that came from his long conversations with plants, from his silent observations of natural patterns. Every stroke on his paper was like a translation of nature's secret language. One project in particular caught his eye, a design for a community garden in the city center. The site had been abandoned for years, according to the notes, but Marco could see its potential. With his colored pencils, he began sketching out a new design based on what he called soil mood cycles, a concept that came naturally to him, as if the plants themselves had taught him. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice the small red light blinking discreetly in the corner of the room, the security camera that recorded his every move. He also didn't notice the time passing, nor the footsteps approaching down the hallway. It was the creak of the door opening that finally brought him back to reality. Marco froze, his pencil still poised over the paper, when a deep and surprisingly calm voice filled the room. "So you're the little invader who's been correcting my designs." There, standing in the doorway of the office, was Franco Muller himself, the owner of the mansion, one of the most influential businessmen in the city. His eyes, behind his gold-rimmed glasses, showed not anger, but an intense curiosity that Marco could not understand. The boy felt the blood drain from his face. His hands began to shake, and all the fear he must have felt before entering that forbidden room finally caught up with him. He thought about his mother, about her job, about the consequences his actions could bring. But before he could stammer out an apology, Mr. Muller was already at his side, examining the changes he had made to the plans. The silence in the office was thick as Franco Muller meticulously analyzed each note that Marco had made. His eyes scanned the lines the boy had drawn with disconcerting intensity. Suddenly, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Carmen, please call Diana, the new cleaning lady, to my office immediately." Her voice was controlled, revealing no emotion. Marco felt his heart tighten. In his mind, he could already imagine his mother being fired because of him, the bills they wouldn't be able to pay, the apartment they would have to leave. Tears began to form in his eyes, but he held them back, determined to face the consequences of his actions. Minutes later, Diana walked into the office, her face pale as she saw her son there. "Mr. Muller, I can explain." "Can you really?" the businessman interrupted, still holding Marco's drawings. "Can you explain to me how your 12-year-old son can spot flaws in projects that cost millions and were developed by some of the most renowned landscapers in the country?" Diana looked confused at Marco, who kept his eyes fixed on the ground. Franco Muller got up from his chair and walked to the window, looking out over the mansion's gardens. How long have you been studying landscaping, Diana? He asked, surprising. Both mother and son. Well, she hesitated. I've always liked plants. I take some online courses when I can. I read a lot about the subject. Marco inherited that interest. Franco turned to them, an enigmatic smile on his face. I noticed that you two have a special gift. I saw on the cameras how your son worked on the projects. It wasn't vandalism or childish curiosity. He knew exactly what he was doing. He walked over to Marco, placing a hand on his shoulder. Tell me, young man, how did you know those species wouldn't be a good match? How did you notice the drainage problems? Marco swallowed, finding courage in his love of plants. I can hear it, sir. Plants, they have a way of letting you know when something is wrong. It's like each one has its own song, and when they're misplaced, the melody goes out of tune. Instead of laughing or dismissing the boy's explanation as fantasy, Franco Mueller nodded seriously. He walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out an old book, its pages yellowed with age. This was written by my grandfather, Andre Mueller, he explained, leafing through the volume carefully. He was considered eccentric because he said something very similar, that plants communicated with him, that there was a secret language in natural patterns. No one took him seriously at the time. Diana watched the scene with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Franco continued, I have a test for you two. There is a community garden in the city center that has been abandoned for years. No revitalization project has worked so far. Marco, I saw your notes on the soil mood cycles. I would, like you and your mother, to try to reclaim that space. Marco's eyes lit up. You want us to take care of an entire garden? More than that, Franco replied. I want you to prove that your way of understanding nature works. Diana, you will be hired as a consultant, no longer a cleaner. Marco will be allowed to accompany you and develop his own projects under your supervision. Mother and son looked at each other, barely able to believe the turn their lives had taken. But Franco wasn't finished. There is only one condition, he said, his tone growing more serious. You will have to work with our technical team, including our chief architect, Raphael Marchand. He is a traditionalist in his methods. It will not be easy to convince him to accept different approaches. Diana squeezed Marco's hand, conveying strength. We accept the challenge, Mr. Mueller. Great, the businessman smiled. We'll start tomorrow. And Marco, he bent down to the boy's level. Next time you want to consult my library, just ask. I have a feeling you'll find knowledge here that few could ever comprehend. As they left the office, Marco and Diana could barely process what had happened. On the way home, the boy saw the city with different eyes, no longer as a place where nature was being suffocated by concrete, but as a field of possibilities, where he could help restore the lost balance. What they didn't know yet was that this community garden held secrets much deeper than anyone could imagine. Secrets that would begin to reveal themselves as soon as the earth was touched by hands that truly knew how to listen. The morning was cool when Marco and Diana arrived at the community garden. Surrounded by tall buildings, the site was an island of neglect in the city center. Weeds grew between cracks in the concrete, and neglected trees cast uneven shadows over parched flower beds. Raphael Marchand, the chief architect, was already waiting for them with his team. Tall and impeccably dressed, he barely concealed his displeasure with the situation. So this is the miracle duo that will teach us how to do our job? He commented ironically, adjusting his expensive tie. Franco Mueller, who had just arrived, intervened. Raphael, please, let's give different methods a chance. The conventional ones clearly didn't work here. Marco was no longer paying attention to the discussion. He had moved away from the group and was walking slowly through the garden, his fingers lightly brushing the leaves of the plants he came across. His eyes were half closed, as if he were listening to music that only he could hear. Diana watched, him with a soft smile, recognizing that expression. It was the same one her son had when he spent hours in the small garden at home, talking to his plants. She herself began to examine the grounds, her extraordinary visual memory cataloguing every detail of the place. The soil is sad, Marco suddenly declared, causing everyone to turn to him. It's been hurt too many times. Harsh chemicals, roots, ripped out carelessly, concrete poured with no respect for what lived here before. Raphael rolled his eyes, but Franco approached the boy, interested. And how can we help him recover? We need to start in the corners, Marco explained, pointing to the edges of the garden. That's where there are still healthy colonies of microorganisms. We'll use pioneer plants to create healing corridors, letting them pave the way for more demanding species, Diana added. I noticed that the shadow pattern changes dramatically throughout the day because of the buildings. We need to create a luminosity map before deciding the final placement of each species. The technical team began taking notes, some clearly intrigued by this unorthodox approach. Raphael, however, remained skeptical. This is going to take months. The project deadline is only 6 weeks. Nature has its own time, Marco replied, with a certainty that surprised everyone. But if we work with it and not against it, the process will be faster than you imagine. Over the course of the morning, mother and son came up with a plan that defied all convention. Instead of removing all the existing vegetation, they proposed working with it, identifying plants that could help restore the soil. Diana drew a detailed map of the land, marking areas of sun and shade, points of water accumulation and regions with the most biological activity. As they worked, Marco began to notice something strange. There was a pattern in the arrangement. Of the older trees, something that didn't seem natural. He approached one of them, a sturdy fig tree that must have been decades old. "Mr. Muller," he called excitedly, "look at this." At the base of the tree, partially covered in moss, there was a symbol carved into the bark. It was a double spiral, with markings that resembled cardinal points. Franco paled when he saw the mark. "Impossible," he muttered. "That's my grandfather's signature. He used to mark the trees he planted with that symbol, but that would mean that this garden was designed by him," Marco added, his eyes shining with excitement. "And look at how the trees are positioned. They form a larger pattern." Diana, with her privileged visual memory, was already drawing what she saw. From above, the ancient trees formed a complex structure like a living mandala. Each species had been strategically positioned to create a self-sustaining system. "My grandfather always said he had developed a revolutionary method of landscaping," Franco explained, his voice choked with emotion. "He called it the Green Code, but his writings on the subject disappeared after he passed away, and everyone thought it was just the imagination of an eccentric old man." Raphael watched the scene with an expression that was hard to decipher. For the first time, there seemed to be a crack in his facade of skepticism. "There's more," Marco said, running from tree to tree. "Each symbol is a little different. It's like instructions, a map to understand how the garden should work." What had begun as a revitalization project was turning into something much bigger, the rediscovery of lost knowledge, a method of working with nature that had been forgotten for decades. And Marco, the boy who had always been considered strange for talking to plants, was at the center of this extraordinary discovery. Over the next few weeks, the community garden became a living laboratory. Marco and Diana spent every spare moment studying the symbols on the trees, documenting their discoveries and implementing what they learned. Each day, new revelations emerged among the roots and leaves of this ancient space. Franco Muller provided all the resources needed for the project, fascinated by the possibility of recovering his grandfather's legacy. He himself began to visit the garden regularly, bringing old photographs and documents that could help decipher the Green Code. One particularly productive afternoon, as Diana mapped the location of each symbol she had found, Marco made a surprising discovery. Sitting in the shade of the ancient fig tree, he noticed that the patterns of exposed roots were not random. They formed lines that connected with other trees. "Mom!" he called excitedly. "Come see this. The roots. They're like a text. Each connection tells a part of the story." Diana approached, her trained eyes immediately picking up on what her son had noticed. With her photographic memory, she began to draw the complex system of connections. Franco, who was standing nearby, watched in amazement. "It's like a living library," Marco whispered, his fingers delicately tracing the lines in the roots. Each tree is a chapter, and all together they tell the complete story of the garden. Raphael Marchand, who had until then maintained his skeptical distance, could not ignore the visible changes in the area. Plants that he had sworn were beyond recovery were beginning to show signs of new life. Species that had disappeared from the region were spontaneously sprouting again. "Impossible," he muttered, surveying a bed that had been completely barren weeks before. No conventional method could achieve results this quickly. Marco smiled, recognizing the first genuine chink in the architect's armor. "It's not impossible, Mr. Raphael. It's just different from what we're used to. Plants know how to heal themselves. We just need to learn their language." Work continued to advance, but not everything was rosy. A large agricultural chemical company, Agrotech, began to show suspicious interest in the project. Representatives dropped by frequently, asking questions and taking photographs. "They are worried," Franco explained during a meeting with the team. "The method we are rediscovering here does not depend on industrial products. If it works on a large scale, it could change everything," Diana added, understanding the implications. Tensions rose when Clara Martin, an executive at Agrotech, appeared in the garden with a tempting proposal. "Mr. Mueller, our company is willing to fund a research foundation dedicated to this project. Imagine the benefits of having unlimited resources to expand this work." Franco seemed tempted, but Marco saw the trap between the lines. "On what conditions?" asked the boy, surprising everyone with his perspicacity. Clara smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a few patents and exclusive rights to the methods developed. After all, research of this magnitude needs to be protected, doesn't?" "Just." The silence that followed was heavy. Franco looked at Marco, then at the trees his grandfather had planted decades ago. Something in his expression changed. "No," he said finally, "this knowledge does not belong to any company. It belongs to nature itself." Clara left the garden visibly upset, but Marco knew that this would not be the last time they would have to defend old André Müller's legacy. That night, while organizing their notes in the mansion's library, Marco and Diana made a discovery that would change everything. Among Franco's grandfather's old books, they found a worn diary. On the last pages was a detailed map of the community, garden with notes in the margins. "The real treasure is not in what we plant, but in what we learn from each seed. This garden is just the beginning. The green code is the key to something much greater." Marco felt a shiver run down his spine. His instincts told him they were only scratching the surface of a much deeper mystery. The plants had more to teach him, and he was ready to learn. The community garden was flourishing in ways no one could have predicted. In just 1 month, the once abandoned space had transformed into a vibrant urban oasis. Butterflies danced among the newly awakened flowers, bees buzzed happily, and birds that had long since abandoned the area returned to build their nests. Marco spent more and more time studying old André's diary. The entries were complex, mixing botanical observations with mysterious symbols and references to natural cycles that few had noticed. The boy began to have strange dreams in which geometric patterns intertwined with leaf shapes and root structures. "It's as if the plants are teaching me while I sleep," he confided to his mother one morning as they worked in the garden. Diana smiled, recognizing the same sparkle in her son's eyes that she saw in old photographs of André Müller. Raphael Marchand, who had initially treated the project with disdain, now spent hours watching Marco work. The architect began to make his own notes, trying to understand how a 12-year-old could understand patterns that had eluded experienced professionals for decades. "The secret is to listen," Marco explained, noticing the architect's interest. "Have you ever noticed how plants grow in a spiral? How leaves are organized to make the most of the light? Nature has its own mathematics." One day, while they were experimenting with a new arrangement of medicinal plants, they received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Jonas, a white-haired gentleman who had lived in the neighborhood for more than 50 years, stopped to watch their work. "This reminds me of the old days," he said, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I knew your grandfather, Mr. Franco. André was a man ahead of his time. He had a wonderful vegetable garden nearby before they sold the land to that pesticide company. Franco, who was present, turned pale. "Did you say pesticide company?" "Yes. Agrotech. They bought several plots of land in the region in the 90s. Your grandfather's vegetable garden was one of the first to go. He was devastated. He said there were important secrets planted there." Marco and Diana exchanged meaningful glances. The Agrotech executive's recent visit was beginning to make more sense. It wasn't just the community garden that interested them. It was all the knowledge André Müller had accumulated. That afternoon, while watering a patch of herbs, Marco had an epiphany. The symbols on the trees, the connections between the roots, the patterns he saw in his dreams, they were all part of a larger system. "Mr. Franco," he called, barely containing his excitement, "I guess your grandfather wasn't just creating gardens. He was developing a whole method of natural regeneration, a way to make the earth heal itself without the need for chemicals." The news spread quickly. Journalists began to show up, intrigued by the stories of the garden regenerating itself. Environmentalists became interested in the potential for restoring degraded areas. Even scientists from renowned universities came to observe the phenomenon. But it was a chance discovery that really changed the course of events. One rainy afternoon, while organizing tools in the small garden shed, Marco and Diana found an old box hidden under loose floorboards. Inside were more of André Müller's journals, as well as detailed drawings and complex formulas. It was the complete record of his discoveries, preserved from time and the corporate interests that had tried to silence him. "This changes everything," Franco whispered, flipping through the documents reverently. "With this information, we can not only restore this garden, but create a regeneration movement on a global scale." Marco smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of discovery. The plants around him seemed to vibrate with renewed energy, as if they knew that their moment of reconnection with humans had finally arrived. The discovery of André Müller's complete diaries led to a race against time. Marco, Diana, and Franco spent entire days deciphering the notes, while Agrotech intensified its pressure on the project. The company now sent representatives daily, always with new proposals and subtle, veiled threats. On a particularly tense morning, Clara Martin returned to the garden, this time accompanied by a team of lawyers. "Mr. Müller," she began, her tone falsely cordial, "our company owns rights to several parcels of land in this region, including areas your grandfather used for research. Technically, any discoveries made on these sites belong to us." Franco remained calm, but Marco could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Martin, but the methods developed by my grandfather, as well as his personal notes, are the property of our family." "Perhaps we should discuss this in more practical terms," Clara insisted, opening a folder. "We are prepared to make a substantial offer, enough to create a research foundation with unlimited resources." It was at this moment that Raphael Marchand, who had been watching the scene from afar, decided to intervene. To everyone's surprise, he positioned himself next to Marco and Diana. "As the chief architect of this project," he declared, his voice firm, "I can attest that the methods we are using are completely original and based on the team's recent discoveries. There is no legal relationship to older research." Clara narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed by the unexpected intervention. "Mr. Marchand, your reputation in the market is considerable. Are you sure you want to align yourself with unproven alternative methods?" "Not only am I certain," Raphael replied, "but I intend to document the entire process. What I have witnessed here in the last few weeks defies everything I have learned in 30 years of this profession." While the adults argued, Marco continued his work in the garden. Something in André's journals had caught his attention, a mention of a resonance core, a specific point where all the energy lines in the garden met. Following the instructions, encoded in the symbols on the trees, the boy began to draw invisible lines between different species. Diana, noticing what her son was doing, used her visual memory to help map the patterns. "Mom," Marco whispered excitedly, "this is it. The center point is exactly where that purple EP tree sprouted spontaneously last week." The IP tree, still small but surprisingly vigorous, had sprung up without anyone planting it, breaking through the concrete as if responding to an ancestral call. Around it, other plants seemed to organize themselves in a spiral pattern, creating a living mandala that could only be perceived when observing the garden from above. Franco, who had managed to temporarily remove the agrotech team, joined them. "What did you find out?" "Your grandfather wasn't just creating gardens," Marco explained, his eyes shining with excitement. "He was establishing natural regeneration points all over the city. Each garden was part of a larger network, connected by invisible corridors of biodiversity." Diana added, "The symbols on the trees aren't just markers, they're coordinates. Each point connects to other gardens, creating a web of life that can naturally spread throughout the entire city." The discovery was revolutionary. If they were right, André Muller's work went far beyond conventional gardening. It was a meticulous plan to restore nature's ability to regenerate itself, even in harsh urban environments. Raphael, who had approached silently, took out his tablet and began overlaying old maps of the city with the coordinates they had discovered. "Amazing," he muttered. "Several of the marked points correspond to areas that have inexplicably resisted environmental degradation over the years. These were the nodes of the network that André created." But the excitement of the discovery was interrupted by the sound of engines. Through the garden fence, they saw a row of agrotech trucks pulling up. Clara Martin got out of an executive car, a triumphant smile on her face. "Last chance, Mr. Muller," she announced. "Either we negotiate now, or we will have to take more. Assertive measures." Marco clutched the journals to his chest, feeling the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just a garden they were protecting. It was the future of an entire city, a legacy of knowledge that could change the way humans related to nature. The tension in the garden was palpable. Agrotech employees began unloading equipment from trucks, while Clara Martin stood by with a look of superiority. Franco Muller looked torn, the weight of the decision clearly visible on his face. It was Marco who broke the deadlock in a completely unexpected way. Approaching the small epee tree that marked the central point of the garden, he began to speak in a loud and clear voice. "Do you want to know why this place is special? It's not because of the secrets it holds, but because of the truth it reveals. Nature doesn't need patents or contracts, it just needs respect and understanding." Diana, realizing her son's intention, took out her tablet and began projecting images of the garden onto a makeshift screen. The photographs showed the impressive transformation of the space in just a few weeks. "Look around," Marco continued, his voice gaining strength. "Every plant here has a story to tell. Every shoot that breaks through the concrete is proof that nature knows how to heal itself, without chemicals, without expensive technology, without corporate secrets." Raphael Marchand, surprising everyone once again, stepped forward. "As an architect, I spent years defending traditional methods, but what I witnessed here," he paused, looking down at his own hands. "This boy and his mother taught me more about natural regeneration in a few weeks than I have learned in my entire career." Mr. Jonas, who was among the residents gathered to defend the garden, began to tell his story. How his garden had been destroyed by agrotech products, how the soil had become sterile, and how now, thanks to the natural methods rediscovered by Marco and Diana, plants were growing again in his backyard. Other residents joined in, sharing their own experiences. One woman showed off organic tomatoes grown using techniques she had learned from watching the gardeners work. A group of students presented data on the return of bird species to the area. Clara Martin watched the scene with growing discomfort. Her lawyers whispered nervously, aware of the cell phone cameras recording everything. Franco finally made his decision. "Miss Martin, I appreciate your company's offer, but I must decline. The work we are doing here is bigger than money or corporate power." "You don't understand," Clara argued, her composure beginning to falter. "This knowledge needs to be controlled, regulated." "No," Marco replied, his voice surprisingly calm. "This knowledge needs to be shared." As if in response to his words, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves in the garden. The small epee tree, although still young, seemed to shine in the sunlight, its roots firmly anchored in the previously barren soil. Diana, who had remained silent, approached with Andre Muller's diaries in her hands. "Your grandfather left specific instructions, Mr. Franco. He intended this knowledge to be a gift to the world, not a tool of power." The crowd that had gathered around the garden grew, journalists covering the confrontation broadcast live. On social media, the story of the miraculous garden and the boy who spoke to plants spread quickly. Clara Martin looked around, realizing that she had lost control of the situation. With a sharp gesture, she ordered her team to retreat. The trucks began to drive away, taking with them Agrotech's empty threats. But the true victory was not just in the departure of the invaders. It was in the amazed eyes of the people who discovered the power of nature, in the renewed hope of the locals, in Franco's proud smile as he saw his grandfather's legacy finally understood. Marco turned his attention back to the garden, whispering, a silent thank you to the plants that had helped them get here. The work was just beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to regenerate, so much more to share with the world. After Agrotech left, the community garden became a living learning center. People from all over the city came to see Marco and Diana's work, eager to learn how they could apply natural methods to their own green spaces. Franco Muller, inspired by public interest, decided to transform part of his mansion into a center for environmental studies. His grandfather's private library, previously restricted, was open to researchers and enthusiasts. Andre Muller's carefully digitized diaries began to reveal even deeper secrets. "Look at this," Marco exclaimed one afternoon as he studied one of the manuscripts with his mother and Raphael. "Your grandfather mapped 7 key points in the city, Mr. Franco. Each of them was supposed to function as a natural regeneration hub." Diana, using her extraordinary visual memory, began to mark the points on a digital map of the city. "It's amazing. They form a perfect 7-pointed star, and our garden is one of them." Raphael, who had now fully embraced the cause, complemented the analysis with his knowledge of urban planning. These points were not chosen at random. Each one is strategically positioned in areas that influence the flow of groundwater and the circulation of air in the city. Work began immediately to identify the other 6 sites. Some were abandoned land, others had been covered with concrete, but if you looked closely, you could find signs of Andre Muller's presence in all of them. In one of the places, now a parking lot, Marco discovered an old fig tree that had survived urbanization. At its base, almost erased by time, was the familiar symbol of the double spiral. Even more surprising was finding, growing between the cracks in the asphalt, species of plants that were not common in the region. "They are guardian plants," Marco explained to the group that accompanied him. "They protect the soil, maintaining its properties even in adverse conditions. It is as if they are waiting for the right moment to awaken." The press, which had previously treated the project with skepticism, now followed each discovery with renewed interest. An environmental reporter, Julia Simon, began producing a series of documentaries about the regeneration work. "What you're doing here is revolutionary," she said in an interview. "It's not just about gardens or plants. It's about reconnecting people with the natural wisdom that we've lost." The project's impact began to spread in unexpected ways. Schools organized field trips to the community garden, where Marco and Diana offered workshops on natural farming. Landscaping companies approached Raphael, interested in incorporating regenerative methods into their projects. Mr. Jonas, the former resident who had known Andre Muller, became a regular presence in the garden. His stories about the neighborhood's past helped the team better understand the old botanist's original plan. "Andre always said that plants have memories," he said one afternoon as he helped Marco prepare a new flower bed. "That they hold the history of the place and know exactly what needs to be done to restore balance." The wisdom of these words was confirmed every day. As they worked to restore the original sites, inexplicable phenomena began to occur. Species that had disappeared from the region decades ago began to spontaneously reappear. The local rainfall pattern began to regularize. The air quality in the neighborhoods near the gardens showed significant improvement. Franco, observing the progress, made an important decision. "We are going to create a foundation," he announced during a staff meeting, "but not a traditional foundation. It will be an open research and education center, where knowledge will be shared freely." Marco, who had been sketching new planting patterns in his notebook, looked up excitedly. "We can invite other community gardens to join in, create a regeneration network that spreads across the entire city." Diana smiled, recognizing in her son the same visionary brilliance that must have inspired Andre Mueller decades ago. "And we can document it all," she suggested. "Create a living manual that keeps evolving as we learn more." News of the foundation spread quickly. Soon, messages began arriving from other countries, from people interested in learning about and replicating the work. Andre Muller's dream of planetary regeneration began to take shape through the hands of a boy who, like him, knew how to listen to the whisper of plants. Marco's dreams became increasingly vivid. In them, geometric patterns danced like living constellations, revealing connections between the 7 gardens he and his team were working to restore. He would wake with startling insights, as if the land itself were guiding his understanding. One particularly significant morning, while working on the 3rd point of the star, a plot of land near an ancient square, Marco made an extraordinary discovery. Beneath a layer of rubble, he found not only Andre Muller's distinctive symbol, but a series of inscriptions that appeared to form a musical score. "Mr. Franco," he called, barely containing his excitement. "I guess your grandfather wasn't just creating a regeneration system, he was composing a living symphony." Diana, who recorded each discovery with her precise memory, began to notice the pattern. The arrangements of the plants, the distance between the trees, even the depth of the roots. Everything follows a specific rhythm. Raphael, who was developing software to map the gardens, incorporated this new dimension into the project. "It's like music in 3 dimensions," he explained, showing computer graphics. "Each garden is like a different movement in a large composition." The discovery attracted the attention of an unusual group, musicians and mathematicians. A young music teacher, Amelia, began working with the team, transforming natural patterns into sound sequences. "It's fascinating," she commented after a recording session in the garden. "The frequencies we found correspond exactly to the vibrations that plants emit as they grow." Andre Mueller wasn't just planting plants, he was creating a perfect harmony between all life forms. Franco began to spend more time researching his grandfather's archives. In an old box, he found cassette recordings of Andre's voice explaining his theory. "The Earth has its own language," said the old botanist's husky voice. "It is not merely a matter of chemistry or biology. It is a complex symphony of life, each being contributing its own note. When we learn to listen to this music, we discover that natural regeneration follows a perfect rhythm." Work on the 7 sites continued to advance. At each site, as the process of clearing and preparing the soil began, unexplained phenomena began to occur. Seeds that had lain dormant for decades began to germinate spontaneously. Plant growth patterns followed exactly the predictions in Andre's diaries. The foundation created by Franco grew, attracting researchers and enthusiasts from all over the world. The study center in the Muller mansion became a living laboratory, where science and intuition worked side by side. Julia Simon, the environmental reporter, produced a special documentary about the musical dimension of the project. "What we are witnessing here," she narrated, "is the rediscovery of a universal language, a form of communication that transcends words and connects all living beings." Marco spent more and more time teaching other children. His ability to translate complex concepts into simple explanations made him a natural teacher. "Plants are like a great orchestra," he explained to a group of fascinated students. "Each one has its own instrument, its own voice. Our task is to learn to conduct this natural concert." Diana, watching her son share his gift, saw how he had blossomed. The boy who had once been considered strange for talking to plants was now seen as a pioneer, paving the way for a new way of understanding and working with nature. One late afternoon, As the team celebrated the complete recovery of the fourth point of the star, an extraordinary phenomenon occurred. The plants in the different gardens seemed to pulse in sync, as if responding to an invisible ruler. The setting sun painted the sky with vibrant colors, and a gentle breeze carried seeds from one garden to another. "It's your grandfather's symphony come to life," Marco whispered to Franco as they watched the spectacle. "Each garden is a note, and together they are creating a music that can heal the entire city." The discovery of the musical dimension of gardens opened up new possibilities for the project. Amelia, the music teacher, developed a system for translating the growth patterns of plants into musical compositions. The resulting melodies were surprisingly harmonious, as if each species contributed its own note to a natural symphony. During one of these recording sessions, Marco noticed something intriguing. "The plants respond differently when we play certain frequencies," he observed, noting how some flowers opened wider and others subtly changed their orientation. Diana, who catalogued each reaction with her extraordinary photographic memory, began to establish patterns. "It's not just a response to music," she explained, showing her notes. "It's as if the plants are trying to teach us their own musical language." Franco delved further into his grandfather's archives, searching for references to this connection between music and plant growth. In a dusty notebook, he found fascinating notes. "The music of the earth is not just metaphorical," Andre had written. "It is a real language, a form of communication that has existed for millions of years. Every plant, every microorganism in the soil contributes to this living orchestra. The ancients knew this. They planted and harvested according to natural rhythms." Raphael, intrigued by this new dimension of the project, adapted his software to include sound analysis. "It's incredible," he said, showing the results to the team. "The frequencies we recorded in the healthiest gardens form perfect chords. It's as if nature itself were a great musician." News of this discovery attracted the attention of an unexpected group. The National Institute for Sound Research sent a team to study the phenomenon. Among the researchers was Laura Caron, their bioacoustics expert, who was particularly impressed by the work. "What you've discovered here goes beyond conventional science," she explained after weeks of analysis. "These plants aren't just responding to music. They're actively engaging in complex communication that we've never documented before." Marco began to incorporate musical elements into his regeneration techniques. With Amelia's help, he developed plant concerts, sessions where different frequencies were played to stimulate growth and soil recovery. The results were visible. In areas where music was played regularly, plants grew more vigorously, the soil recovered more quickly, and even species considered incompatible seemed to find a harmonious balance. Mr. Jonas, who remained a valuable source of memories about Andre Mueller, recalled something important. Old Andre used to sing while he worked in the garden. It wasn't just songs. He said he was tuning in to the natural frequency of the plants. During a particularly productive afternoon, while working on the fifth point of the star, something extraordinary happened. Marco, who had become more sensitive to natural vibrations, noticed a subtle pattern in the soil. "It's like a pulse," he explained, placing his hand on the earth, "as if the ground itself is keeping a rhythm." Diana and Franco joined him, and soon the entire team could feel the faint but distinct vibration. Amelia quickly set up recording equipment, capturing frequencies that were normally beyond human perception. When they analyzed the recordings, they made a surprising discovery. The rhythmic pattern of the solo matched exactly the musical notes found in Andre Muller's diaries. He wasn't creating new music, Marco realized in amazement. He was transcribing music that already existed naturally. The entire system of regeneration is based on harmonizing with the rhythms that the earth itself produces. The revelation brought a new dimension to the project. It wasn't just about planting trees or restoring soils. It was about relearning to listen to an ancient language that had been forgotten by humanity. Franco, thrilled by the discovery, shared another cassette tape of his grandfather. The music of the earth is an infinite symphony, Andre's voice said. Every living being is both a musician and an instrument. When we learn to play in harmony with this natural orchestra, we will discover that regeneration is only the beginning of something much greater. The work on the 7 points of the star took on a new dimension with the incorporation of music. Each garden now had its own sound signature, a unique combination of frequencies that reflected the health and balance of the local ecosystem. Amelia and her team developed a system of special sensors that could pick up the subtlest vibrations in the soil and plants. The data collected was transformed into musical scores that Marco used to adjust his planting and care methods. "It's as if each plant is a musician in a giant orchestra," he explained during a workshop with botany students. "When one species is in the wrong place, it's like an instrument out of tune. It disrupts the harmony of the ensemble." Diana, always attentive to detail, began to notice even more complex patterns. "The rhythms change with the phases of the moon," she noted, showing her meticulous records, "and there are subtle variations that correspond perfectly with Mr. Andre's notes on natural cycles." Professor Laura Caron, who was continuing her research at the site, made a fascinating discovery. The frequencies we recorded here are virtually identical to those found in pristine, untouched ecosystems. It's as if the gardens are recovering their original music. Franco, inspired by these discoveries, decided to organize a unique event, a concert where musicians would play along with the natural frequencies of the gardens. The idea attracted artists and scientists from all over the world. "It will be a celebration of harmony between humanity and nature," he announced, "just as my grandfather always dreamed." Preparations for the concert mobilized the entire city. Raphael developed a visualization system that would allow the public to see the sound waves of plants in real time. Visual artists created installations that responded to natural frequencies. Marco spent days adjusting each bed, ensuring that all the plants were in their most harmonious state. His sensitivity to natural music had developed so much that he could identify imbalances by sound alone. On the night of the concert, something magical happened. When the orchestra began to play in sync with the frequencies of the gardens, the plants seemed to respond. Flowers opened at odd times, leaves danced without the wind, and a soft luminescence emanated from some species. "It's like they're singing with us," Amelia whispered in wonder. The show was broadcast live around the world. Scientists, artists, and environmentalists watched in fascination as the profound connection between music and nature was demonstrated. During the concert, Marco noticed something extraordinary. The combined vibrations of the 7 gardens formed a larger pattern, as if each point of the star was part of a larger composition. "Mr. Franco," he called excitedly, "I think I've discovered the true purpose of your grandfather's project. The 7 gardens together are not just points of regeneration. They are like sounding boards that can amplify the natural music of the land." Diana, quickly analyzing the patterns with her photographic memory, confirmed the theory. The symbols on the trees aren't just markers, they're notes on a giant sheet of music. The revelation brought a new understanding of Andre Muller's work. He had not only created a system of ecological regeneration, he had laid the foundation for a profound reconnection between humanity and nature through music. The concert ended with a special composition based on the natural frequencies of the 7 gardens combined. As the final notes echoed through the night, a sense of deep harmony hung in the air. "This is just the beginning," Marco said, his eyes shining with excitement. "Now that we have learned to listen to the music of the earth, we can help other places regain their own natural harmony." Franco smiled, recognizing in the boy's words the same visionary spirit as his grandfather. The symphony of nature, long forgotten, was finally being rediscovered, and with it, a new hope for the regeneration of the planet. The success of the concert in the gardens sparked a wave of change that no one could have foreseen. Videos of the event spread across the internet, attracting the attention of communities and scientists around the world. The Muller Foundation's phone rang non-stop, with requests for information and proposals for partnerships. Marco, now internationally recognized as a prodigy in natural regeneration, began to receive invitations to share his knowledge in other countries. However, his priority remained working on the 7 points of the star. "We still have a lot to learn here," he explained during a video conference with foreign researchers. Every day the plants tell us something new about the system Mr. Andre has created. Diana, who had become an expert in documenting natural patterns, developed a unique recording method that combined her photographic memory with the team's musical discoveries. It's like a new kind of notation, she explained, something between a musical score and a living topographical map. The work at the sixth point of the star was particularly challenging. The site, a site near a former industrial site, had high levels of contamination. Yet even there, signs of Andre Muller's work could be found. "Look at this," Marco called one morning, pointing to a group of plants growing in unusual patterns. They're arranging themselves in spirals, following exactly the frequencies we recorded in the other gardens. Raphael, who was continuing to refine his analysis software, made a surprising discovery. The plants are not just responding to music. They are actively modifying soil conditions through specific vibrations. Laura Karen and her bioacoustics team confirmed the theory. "It's a natural bioremediation process," she explained, showing complex graphs. "The plants are literally singing to clean the soil." News of this discovery caught the attention of an unexpected figure. Isabella Chen, a renowned environmental scientist, visited the project after seeing the video of the concert. Her specialty was the restoration of degraded areas, and what she found in the gardens left her amazed. "What you've discovered here is revolutionary," she said after spending days studying the methods. "It's not just about music or plants. It's a new paradigm of ecological regeneration." Franco, inspired by the growing interest, decided to organize an international symposium on natural regeneration through music. The event would bring together scientists, artists, and practitioners of natural techniques from around the world. "My grandfather always said that knowledge should flow freely like water," he said during a planning meeting. "This symposium will be our way of honoring that principle." Marco spent more and more time teaching other young people. His ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms and his natural connection with plants made him an extraordinary teacher. "You don't have to be a genius or have expensive equipment," he explained to a group of students. "The most important thing is to learn to listen. Nature is always teaching us. We just need to pay attention to its signals." During one of these classes, an unexpected discovery occurred. One of the students, Maria, just 10 years old, demonstrated a special sensitivity to natural frequencies, similar to Marco's. "I can hear the plants singing," she said shyly. "Each one has its own song." Diana watched the girl with interest. "Maybe it's no coincidence," she said to Franco. "Your grandfather always believed that some people were born with a natural gift for hearing the music of the earth." The news that other children were beginning to develop the same sensitivity as Marco brought a new dimension to the project. It wasn't just about recovering Andre Muller's work, it was about awakening a new generation of nature guardians. Amelia, inspired by this discovery, began developing a special music education program that combined traditional music theory with the perception of natural frequencies. "We are creating a new form of literacy," she explained, "one that includes the language of plants." The discovery of other children with special sensitivity to natural frequencies caused a stir in the scientific community. What had previously been considered a unique gift in Marco was now revealed to be a latent ability that could be awakened and developed. Isabella Chen, an environmental scientist, began studying the phenomenon systematically. "It's fascinating," she said, watching a group of children working in the garden. "It seems that the more time they spend in harmonious gardens, the more their natural perceptions develop." Maria, the young student who first demonstrated the gift, became a sort of assistant to Marco. Together they discovered that they could hear different aspects of natural music. While Marco was more sensitive to growth patterns, Maria was better at perceiving the nutritional needs of plants. "It's as if each of us can hear a different part of the orchestra," Marco explained during a working session. "Together, we can better understand the complete music." Diana, always attentive to detail, began to document the different forms of perception that emerged. Some children demonstrated an affinity with the frequencies of flowers, others with the rhythms of roots or the vibrations of the soil. "Mr. Andre was right," she told Franco, showing him her notes. In one of his journals, he mentions that each person has their own resonance frequency with nature. Work on the sixth point of the star progressed rapidly with the help of the new Earth listeners, as the children began to be called. The contaminated soil responded surprisingly well to musical harmonization techniques. Raphael, adapting his software to include the children's observations, created a three-dimensional map of the natural frequencies. "It's incredible," he explained, showing the visualizations. "We can literally see how the music of the earth moves and changes." Amelia expanded her educational program, incorporating the emerging discoveries. "We're not just teaching music or ecology," she said. "We're helping children reconnect with a form of knowing that is part of our deep nature." During a particularly productive afternoon while working on a new flower bed, Marco and Maria made a surprising discovery. The plants seemed to respond not only to the music they heard, but also to the emotions and intentions of the people around them. "It's like they know when we're really trying to help," Maria observed, her hands gently touching a leaf. "And they respond most strongly when we work together in harmony." This observation led to a new understanding of André Müller's work. His gardens were not just systems of ecological regeneration, they were spaces of reconnection between humans and nature, designed to awaken dormant capacities in all who would listen. Franco, thrilled by the developments, found yet another recording of his grandfather that seemed to foretell all this. "The music of the earth is not a gift reserved for the few," André's voice said. "It is a universal language that everyone can learn to hear again. Children will be the first to awaken because they have not yet forgotten how to dream with plants." The International Symposium was approaching, and with it, the opportunity to share these discoveries with the world. But for Marco, Diana, and their growing community of young listeners from Earth, each day brought new revelations. "We are only beginning to understand," Marco reflected, watching the sunset in the garden. "Vertiefe, every plant, every living thing has its own song to share. Our task is to learn to listen and help others discover their own song in the great symphony of nature." The day of the International Symposium finally arrived. The Müller Mansion and restored gardens were transformed into a meeting space where science, art, and natural wisdom blended harmoniously. Researchers, environmentalists, and curious onlookers from all corners of the world came to witness the phenomenon that was revolutionizing the way we think about natural regeneration. Marco, though accustomed to the attention, felt the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about delivering results, it was about showing the world a new way of relating to nature. Diana, sensing her son's anxiety, put her hand on his shoulder. "Remember what the plants taught us," she said softly. "True strength lies in harmony, not perfection." The event began with an impressive performance. Amelia led an orchestra of professional musicians and children from the music education program, playing a piece based on the natural frequencies of the gardens. The plants visibly responded to the music, creating a spectacle that left the audience in awe. Isabella Chen presented scientific data that confirmed the impact of the method. "In just a few months," she explained, showing detailed graphs, "we recorded significant improvements in soil quality, biodiversity, and even the local microclimate. And all this without the use of chemicals or aggressive interventions." Raphael demonstrated his updated software, which can now create three-dimensional visualizations of the garden's soundscapes. "Each ecosystem has its own musical signature," he explained, "and when we can tune into this natural music, regeneration happens almost spontaneously." But the most impactful moment came when Marco and his group of young Earth listeners conducted a practical demonstration. In a specially prepared garden bed, they showed how they could identify the needs of plants simply through their sensitivity to natural frequencies. "It's not magic," Marco explained to the fascinated onlookers. "It's a form of communication that has always existed. We're just relearning the oldest language on the planet." Franco took the opportunity to announce an ambitious initiative, the Global Network of Harmonious Gardens. "The work my grandfather started here will spread throughout the world," he declared. We will create training centers where people of all ages can develop their natural connection with plants. Laura Karen presented her latest findings on plant bioacoustics. What we observed here goes beyond conventional science, she said. Plants don't just respond to music. They actively participate in a communication network that we are only beginning to understand. During lunch break, something extraordinary happened. Maria, the young student who first demonstrated the special gift, gathered a group of visiting children in the garden. Without any formal instruction, they began to naturally tune in to the local plants. It's like the gift is just dormant, Diana observed, documenting the moment. When we create the right environment, it naturally awakens. The symposium also attracted the attention of community leaders from around the world. Representatives from traditional communities shared their own experiences with the music of the land, building bridges between scientific knowledge and ancestral wisdom. What you have rediscovered here, commented an indigenous elder, is something our people have always known. The earth sings, and when we learn to hear her song, she teaches us the path to healing. As the day progressed, symposium attendees began to experience for themselves the special connection with plants. Renowned scientists joined children in the garden, sharing observations and discoveries. The traditional hierarchy of academic knowledge gave way to a more organic and inclusive way of learning. This is just the beginning, Marco reflected, watching the interaction between the participants. Every person who awakens to the music of the earth becomes a new point of regeneration, a new note in the symphony of nature. Franco, seeing his garden filled with people from all over the world united by the same purpose, knew that his grandfather's dream was finally coming true. The regeneration that had begun in a small community garden was now spreading like waves of harmony across the planet. The success of the International Symposium exceeded all expectations. In the days that followed, partnership proposals and requests for guidance arrived from every continent. The work begun by André Muller, rediscovered by his grandson Franco, and revolutionized by Marco and Diana, was about to become a global movement. Agrotech, realizing the inevitable change in the market, surprised everyone with an announcement. The company decided to create a division dedicated to natural regeneration methods. Clara Martin, in a show of humility, approached Franco to discuss possible collaborations. Sometimes we have to admit that the path we were on was not the best, she acknowledged. The future lies in harmony with nature, not in control over. Thais Marco and his group of young Earth listeners began traveling, taking their knowledge to other communities. In each place they visited, new children discovered their natural connection to plants. It was as if a dormant ability in humanity was finally awakening. Every garden has its own voice, Marco explained during a workshop at a public school. But they are all part of the same song. When we learn to listen, we discover that we have never really been separated from nature. Diana developed a systematic method for documenting and sharing her discoveries. Her system combined scientific observations, musical recordings, and the intuitive wisdom of children. It's a new way of knowing, she explained, one that combines reason and sensibility. Work on the seventh and final point of the star was nearly complete. This garden, located in the geographic center of the city, would be the confluence point of all natural frequencies. Raphael had predicted through his software that when all 7 points were fully harmonized, a unique phenomenon would occur. It's like resonance on an urban scale, he explained, showing his projections. The gardens will act as a natural amplification network, enhancing regeneration across the city. Amelia and her team were preparing a special event to mark the full activation of the network. It would be a unique concert, where musicians in each of the 7 gardens would play simultaneously, creating a symphony that would echo throughout the city. Franco, reviewing his grandfather's last diaries, found a passage that seemed to foretell this moment. When the 7 gardens awaken, the music of the earth will be heard again. It will not be the end of the journey, but the true beginning of regeneration. Preparations for the big concert mobilized the entire city. Schools organized visits to the gardens. Companies adopted more sustainable practices, and even the greyest buildings began to be covered in green with vertical gardens inspired by the work of Marco and Diana. "It's amazing how it all started. With a little boy who talked to plants," said Mr. Jonas, now one of the garden's respected guardians. "And now look, the whole world is learning to listen." Isabella Chen, who was continuing her research at the site, made a surprising observation. "The benefits go beyond environmental regeneration. We are seeing significant improvements in public health, social well-being, and even the local economy. It is as if the entire city is healing itself along with the gardens." On the eve of the great concert, Marco spent a moment alone in the first garden where it had all begun. The plants around him whispered softly, their melodies now clearly audible to anyone who cared to listen. "You always knew, didn't you?" he whispered to the flowers. "You always knew that one day we would learn to hear again." The day of the big concert arrived with a different energy in the air. The entire city seemed to vibrate in anticipation. The 7 gardens, now fully restored, shone with a vitality that drew the amazed glances of everyone who passed by. At each point of the star, musicians and earth listeners prepared for the most ambitious event ever staged. Amelia had coordinated the composition of a unique piece that incorporated the natural frequencies of each garden, creating a symphony that would be performed simultaneously at all 7 locations. "It's more than music," she explained to the musicians during the final rehearsal. "It's a conversation with the earth itself. Every note, every rhythm was inspired by what the plants have taught us." Marco, Diana, and Franco supervised the preparations in the central garden, the 7th point of the star. Raphael had installed a complex system of sensors that would allow him to visualize in real time the sound waves propagating through the city. "According to the projections," he explained, adjusting the equipment, "when all the gardens are in resonance, we should see a unique phenomenon of natural amplification." Isabella Chen and her team of scientists had set up monitoring stations throughout the city. "We will be documenting every aspect of this event," she said, "from changes in air quality to changes in soil microbial activity." The makeshift stands in each garden began to fill up. People of all ages and backgrounds gathered, many bringing their own potted plants, responding to a call they didn't fully understand but could feel. Laura Karen, monitoring the preliminary frequencies, made a surprising discovery. The plants are already responding, even before the concert begins. It's as if they know what's coming. In the central garden, Marco gathered his group of young earth listeners. Maria, now one of the most talented instructors, led attunement exercises with the children new to the program. "Remember," she said, "we are not just listening to the music, we are part of it. Each of us is an instrument in nature's orchestra." As the sun began to set, an electric anticipation filled the air. Franco, in a moment of reflection, shared a final recording of his grandfather with the team. "The true music of the earth cannot be contained in sheet music or recordings," said Andre's voice. "It lives in every being, in every leaf that dances in the wind, in every seed that sprouts. When we learn to play in harmony with this ancient music, we will discover that regeneration is only the first measure of an infinite symphony." Sitir. Moment arrived. In each of the 7 gardens, conductors raised their baton. Marco, Diana, and the children formed a circle in the center of the main garden. Raphael activated his visualization system, projecting light patterns into the night sky. With a synchronized gesture, the music began. It was a melody that transcended the traditional understanding of harmony. Classical instruments blended with the natural frequencies of the gardens, creating a composition that seemed to come from the earth itself. The plants responded immediately. Flowers bloomed out of season, leaves danced without wind, and a soft luminescence began to emanate from certain species. Raphael's sensors picked up waves of energy, expanding in spiral patterns through the city's green corridors. In the center of the main garden, Marco and the children began to notice something extraordinary. The combined frequencies of the 7 gardens created a new melody, one that had never been heard before. It was as if the city itself was singing through its plants, its trees, its regenerated soil. "It's the song your grandfather heard," Marco whispered to Franco, his eyes shining with emotion. "The song he tried to teach us to listen to." The symphony grew, each garden contributing its own voice to the greater harmony. Raphael's visualizations showed waves of energy expanding in ever more complex patterns, connecting not only the 7 points of the star, but the entire city in a living web of music and regeneration. As the grand symphony reached its climax, something extraordinary began to happen. The energy patterns that Raphael had visualized were no longer limited to the 7 points of the star. They were expanding organically, creating new nodes of regeneration throughout the city. Isabella Chen and her team could barely keep up with the changes their instruments were recording. "It's incredible," she exclaimed, looking at the data. "The ground is literally vibrating at regenerative frequencies. It's like every square inch of the city is waking up." In the small gardens of houses and apartments, plants began to respond to the distant music. People reported flowers opening spontaneously in their pots, seeds sprouting without having been planted, and an inexplicable sense of connection with nature. In the center of the main garden, Marco and his group of young Earth listeners were noticing something even more profound. The melodies they had always heard from the plants now seemed to be part of a larger composition, a music that echoed not only through the city, but connected to something much older and more universal. "It's as if we're listening to the memory of the Earth itself," Maria whispered, her hands gently touching the soil. "Every plant, every living thing is remembering its original song." Diana, documenting everything with her extraordinary memory, noticed patterns that transcended her previous notes. "It's not just the gardens that are in harmony," she observed. "It's as if the city itself is reintegrating itself into the natural rhythm of the land." Franco found his grandfather's last diary in his pocket, its pages yellowed with age. In it, André had written his last words. "The true miracle is not in creating something new, but in awakening what has always been there." The music of the Earth has never stopped. It is we who have stopped listening. As the night wore on, the symphony reached new levels of harmony. Raphael's visualizers showed the entire city pulsing with waves of regenerative energy. It was as if every street, every square, every small flower bed had become part of an immense living garden. Laura Karen, analyzing the frequencies, made a surprising discovery. The patterns we are recording are identical to those found in pristine ecosystems. It is as if the city is recovering its natural memory. The children in the program, spread throughout the 7 gardens, began to report similar experiences. They could hear not only the plants nearby, but also feel a connection with the entire living network that was forming. It was as if every living thing in the city had become part of a great natural orchestra. Marco, at the center of it all, finally understood the true extent of André Muller's work. It was not just about creating harmonious gardens or developing regeneration techniques. It was about awakening a dormant consciousness, a form of knowing that has always been present in every human being. "The gift was never just mine," he said, looking out at the hundreds of people gathered in the garden. "It's in each of us. We just needed something to wake us up." As the last note of the symphony finally fell silent, a new sound filled the air, the soft whisper of thousands of plants growing in harmony, the song of birds returning to the city, the hum of bees discovering new gardens. It was the music of the earth, now audible to all who had learned to listen. Franco, overcome with emotion, looked up at the starry sky. "My grandfather knew," he said softly. "He knew that one day the whole city would become a garden, that the music of the earth would once again be heard by all." Marco smiled, feeling the ground vibrate beneath his feet. The work was not finished. In fact, it was only just beginning. But now it was no longer just him or his small group. It was a symphony that grew larger every day, with each new person who learned to hear the song of the plants, with each garden that awakened to its own music. The regeneration that had begun in a small community garden now spread like waves of harmony across the world, reminding everyone that the true music of the earth had never stopped playing.